Welcome to Humpday Happy Hour, hosted by Dentists in the Know, the webcast where dentistry meets real talk, real news, and just the right amount of sarcasm. We are pulling back the curtain on the industry, talking to the experts, the innovators, and the everyday clinicians who are out there doing the work. There's no fluff, there's no filter, and definitely no sales pitches disguised as education. If it's happening in dentistry, from clinical insights to regulatory curveballs and the latest scandal at the ADA, we're probably already talking about it. And yes, we are bringing the goods. So whether you're a seasoned doc, part of the dental team or industry, a curious consumer, or maybe you're just here for the banter, we welcome you all to the show, because around here, we are not just in the loop, we are in the know. Hey there, Dinks. I'm Dr. Jeff Horowitz, accompanied by two amazing clinicians and friends, Dr. Chad Duplantis and Dr. Jennifer Bell. Let's get this thing rolling and let's see what's up in the world of smiles. So, Chad, JB, how are you tonight?
Can you go easy on the amazing clinicians opener? Can we soften that a bit? Like,
nope.
How about showed up for work today, clinicians?
Not gonna do it.
Made
Not
payroll last week.
I
can live with that.
Not gonna.
No.
Not gonna.
No.
Do you remember what that's from? That was the old SNL Dana Carvey doing.
Yeah, no, I know.
Bush. Not gonna do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture.
Is that not raising taxes in a locked box in the bottom of the ocean?
Exactly.
Okay. It didn't stay there, I don't think.
I don't know what Chad is doing. He's in, he's out.
Probably his dog.
But, so the fact that we just had a little political humor is kind of poignant. And because tonight we have an incredible guest who is a young dentist, an entrepreneur, a fourth generation dentist who practices in his family practice that's been around for 100 years now. But more importantly, he has chosen to put himself in a position where he could represent the people of Ohio and maybe do a little representation for dentistry in his campaign running for Congress. So we are really, really excited to have Dr. Stephen Erbeck with us, Ohio dentist, and just an all-around great guy. I had the pleasure of talking with him at length a couple of weeks ago, and really an enjoyable guy. I know you're all going to love it. So that's coming up in just a little bit, but tell us how your week was, guys.
JB?
It was good. I just came back from New York. I got to lecture in Manhattan and then also in Newark. Met some amazing doctors, and it's so energizing when you run into doctors who really are trying to get better. They get excited about new things. And so I think, that's a really important part of my mental health and staying in dentistry, is to get re-energized with other dentists who are also really excited about their journey and sort of encouraging one another and sharing and all the trench stories of the realities of what it is to be a dentist. One of my burning questions for our guest tonight is, we talk a lot about mental health on this show and how it's a real crisis issue for a lot of dentists. And I've got to ask the question, I'm going to give him some time to ponder on it. How bad has dentistry gotten that working in politics sounds better? Really? Because I think we would all argue that politics most days, if you watch the news, sounds pretty frustrating at its very best. And that the rate at which change happens might be slower than a snail. But then I look at dentistry and I'm like, it might not be the worst.
Nope. I mean,
so, maybe he'll give us some insight into the comparisons, the pros and cons of being a dentist versus being in Congress. I think there could be, oh my gosh, Chad's technology is driving me bonkers. Anyway, I think it could be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think there's so much I want to ask him. I mean, to get that bug at that age, I think that's the most interesting part of it, because so many of us, early in our careers, were just so focused on getting better at the next thing in
Right.
dentistry. And, here's what I've studied my whole life for. But he has an interesting insight in that he's seen what has happened over, he hadn't been around for the whole 100 years, but he's certainly heard the stories of the
For sure.
practice and what owning a business has been like throughout the years, and some of the challenges that may exist now versus when the practice was started.
Yeah.
And I think having that kind of multi-generational perspective is something that he can bring to the table, despite the number of years he's been doing it. And he seems really passionate about that, and I'm just really excited to hear from him. So
Same.
yeah,
Me too.
I think it'll be
How's
great.
your week been?
It's been interesting. So finally, this is the week where we started moving. Both of my practices, the sleep practice and the dental practice, have been sharing a tiny little.
I don't know how you've been doing it.
Yeah, tiny space forever. And the dental suite is finished, and they have started putting all the new equipment in. And next Wednesday, we will close down. And then they will move over everything from the sleep side that's supposed to go to the dental side, and everything will be entirely separate. So, and good things, no real setbacks, no knock on something, but all good.
That's good.
Yeah. So far, so good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, these are big, exciting moments for you. So
They really are.
I'm very happy for your mental health and well-being.
Yes, you said this show is about mental health.
Yeah, it's not about mental health. I think there's some correlation here. That's all.
Or the lack thereof. So
that's right. That's right. I've been to enough dental conventions at this point. There is a serious issue.
We talk about this all the time. Some of my friends here who are in dentistry, will say when we go to a meeting, is it me, or is everybody in this profession somehow affected? And I don't mean that in 100% in a negative way. I really do believe we are all affected.
Yes.
To some degree from being in this profession. It's just, how it affects us, or how it affects us. No, affects us, excuse me. The effect would be E. How it affects all of us is really different for each and every one of us. So
I agree.
What you got for news? Since I think Chad is trying to work out some troubles here. He's got an update going on. He said he's 15% of the way there.
I'm taking you back out. Okay. Are we ready to do the news?
Let's do some news.
Okay. Hopefully this will be of some interest to our guest. We're going to start with some light stuff first. We're going to focus on, we've talked a lot on this show. We've had some amazing guests like Dr. Zuckerberg who came on to talk about inflammatory markers and the correlation between periodontal disease and a lot of other disease profiles that are now being connected together. And it all seems to come back to inflammation. In fact, I had a patient one time who was an immunologist who was studying a lot of inflammatory markers, and he was very keen on the correlation between inflammatory markers of the body and periodontal disease, and actually was prophylactically treating his own periodontal disease with anti-inflammatory medications to help control his genetic predisposition. So there's been a lot of data on that for a while. Yeah, I think a lot of other areas in our profession and outside of our profession have seen that connection for a bit. Well, a new study came out of London just recently about the Mediterranean diet. This came out of King's College London and was released on the 15th of this month. And they talked about the connection between a pro-Mediterranean diet and its impact and benefit on periodontal disease. Now, Mediterranean diets have been known to reduce inflammatory markers. So if you have a predisposition genetically towards inflammatory disease processes such as periodontal disease, it might be worth noting that Mediterranean diet might be a better long-term plan for you. Now, what does Mediterranean diet mean? Well, it's primarily focused on whole foods, fruit, vegetables, legumes, olive oil as the fat source, with a moderate intake of fish and other protein sources, very limited red meat, although I guess lamb doesn't really count as red meat, right? But they do take in meat, but it's mostly seafood proteins are a primary source of that meat, olive oil as the primary source of fat, and then whole fruits and vegetables, including citrus. So, if you happen to currently suffer from periodontal disease or are looking for continual opportunities for patients who have periodontal disease to offer a new suggestion for a lifestyle modification other than brushing and flossing and rinses, maybe Mediterranean diet might be for them. All right, let's get political because after all, this show is going to be a little political. Couple of things are coming down that we probably should make note of. First, the ADA did submit some additional comments this week to the DOJ on reviewing some state laws that are impacting competition. Now, the DOJ is reviewing state-specific laws that might be anti-competition laws, might be creating undue monopolies, et cetera. So they have an open comment for different organizations and people and entities to make their concerns known, and the ADA took a position on that. You know, the ADA has a really unique perspective because it can see across all 50 states and how different states have very pro small business and dental laws and other states have very anti dental and anti small business laws. So they can take the compilation of that information to present that to larger groups like the DOJ who are reviewing those different state laws to try to open up commerce, in particular looking at insurance issues, DSOs and their market penetration in different states and how different states recognize them as participating in the marketplace, anti-competition laws or non-compete laws, and how these different safeguards might be in place that are not pro-small business or pro-dental business. So glad to see the ADA stepping up to provide comment. Hopefully, those will be taken into consideration and in review as the DOJ is looking for impact on local economic advancement in different states. Another important deadline for our dental friends out there in the know. We take the CDT code very seriously here at Dentists in the Know. I try to keep you informed, as always, of new changes that have come about, as well as deadlines that might be looming for new changes. If you have a strong, burning passion, desire to want to impact CDT code changes, your deadline for this year to be included in the 2026 review is November 1st. Now, these requests can come from entities, individuals, groups. Dentists in the Know could submit their own CDT code for review and modification. They go through a committee who reviews those. It's a large conglomerate of representatives from different organizations that will then vote to either modify those suggestions or add them wholeheartedly to the CDT code. Not to fear if you missed the November 1st deadline, if this is the first time you're learning about the fact that you can, in fact, impact CDT code change, don't worry, you have time. But if you miss the November 1st deadline, your change won't be reviewed until 2027. And as I foresee it, at least for the time being, that will be the way we will be billing as dentists for the foreseeable future. And with that, that's the news.
All right. Oh, Chad made it.
Hey, Chad. Welcome.
Hey, how are you?
How's the update? Anything
how's
new
it
on,
going over there?
anything new on Windows 4?
Did the hamster stop pedaling your power?
I don't know what happened. I apologize, but I will say, note to self, whenever they say there's a critical update, don't ignore it prior to going live.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
But I
that's
think
good
you
idea.
can schedule it when that happens.
Like, seriously, I'm like watching you all, and all of a sudden my computer goes, brr, brr, brr.
That's so
I was like,
stressful.
oh my God. Yeah. So, anyhow, I'm back.
Enough about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Sorry.
goodness this is a live show.
Yeah, thank goodness. Sure.
because now everyone can really see the authenticity. They can see the real us, right?
Yeah.
That's
That we are obviously not that scripted and not that organized. Well,
No.
at least two of us aren't.
yeah. That would be correct. That would be correct.
We'll let the audience figure out.
Yeah. I think they already have, if you want to know the truth. But
Mm-hmm.
all right, guys. Well, I am gonna bring on our guest. We're actually a little bit early. We're at 8:14.
I'm so excited though.
Like this never happens. But at 8:15, because I promised him he could be away, but I see him in front of his computer. So we might even bring him on a minute or two early. I would love to introduce our guest.
Partha.
Partha's on?
Dear God. He's watching us and the Golden Bachelor at the same time.
No,
And in fairness,
think-
I'm not sure
think
which
since-
is worse.
I
Wait,
think since I
Partha.
said I'm flying solo, he might be referring to me as the Golden Bachelor.
Oh, that's actually true. I thought he was watching the show, but he's watching Jeff and Chad.
Yeah.
But by the way, that really pisses me off, Partha.
Okay.
Oh, Partha's dropping news. There's a well-known dentist who's a contestant on the Golden Bachelor. Guys, you heard it here first.
Okay.
we
Well,
love
we're
to bring that
definitely-
hard-hitting
yeah.
journalism.
We'll have to get into that, but I do, while we are live, I want to give a shout out to Partha, who was voted through the Texas Academy of General
That's amazing.
Dentistry, yeah, as dentist or co-dentist of the year. There were actually two winners. But I said there was a whole slew of nominees, and I saw the pictures, and I actually knew some of the other names. That's what was crazy about this, is just from what we've done in dentistry, getting to know so many people throughout the years. I knew several of the dentists that were nominated, but one of them was Partha, and I was like, I don't know if I get a vote in this thing, and they said no. But I said, if I did, I could tell you who I think should be the guy, because he's just an incredible human being. And congratulations to you, Partha. Well deserved. And couldn't be a better person representing us in dentistry. So
Agreed.
And by the way, talk about somebody who has truly dedicated his life to our profession. That's Partha.
absolutely, absolutely. And it was funny because when I said that to some of the administrators for the Texas AGD, people who are not dentists but just kind of run the behind the scenes for all of that organized part of Texas dentistry, and they all said the same thing. They all knew who he was, and they all said, yeah, you're right, there is no better person. So congratulations to you, Partha. But we are also going to introduce right now another man who is dedicated to his profession, but also dedicated to his state and to his community. So if one of you would be nice enough to bring Dr. Erbeck up, I will do an introduction for him. Dr. Stephen Erbeck is a fourth-generation dentist who was born and raised in Mason, Ohio. He is absolutely no stranger to hard work because he grew up on a farm where he raised pigs. I wish I would have met him several years back so I could talk to him about peaches and maybe convince him to show peaches as a show pig. But those days have passed. He did, in fact, show pigs at the Warren County Fair in Ohio. So I think this is pretty cool, and I do want to get into some of that. But on the professional side, Stephen is a graduate of Ohio State University, and then went on to dental. Well, yeah, and then went on to dental school at NYU College of Dentistry. He then made his way back to Cincinnati to take the reins of the family practice that was started by his great-grandfather, who was his community's first dentist, from what I understand. Also, was he also your first dentist? Did he ever work on you?
I never got to meet great grandpa, but we do have his old chair. We have his old chair out front, Jeff, and that's pretty neat. Yeah.
Well, that's
cool.
neat. And that's such a great part of your story. And now, all this time later, 4 generations later, and Stephen has turned that century-old practice into what is now known as the Cincinnati Dental Group, a state-of-the-art multi-doctor practice with offices in Mason and in Montgomery. And I know some of what he's going to talk about is, continuing that concept of the privately owned practice and the small groups that are privately owned. So I definitely want to hear what you have to say about that. But as a small business owner and a really passionate healthcare advocate, Stephen also attended many lobbying sessions on Capitol Hill to push for greater healthcare access for all and to fight for stronger regulations to combat the opioid epidemic. With that deep passion to do good things for the healthcare community and for patients, he has now decided to also run for Congress to help the constituents of Ohio. He's running in Ohio's 1st district to proudly represent his community with integrity, and he's dedicated to creating a stronger, brighter Ohio, and I hope a stronger, brighter dentistry for the profession. So welcome, Dr. Erbeck. It is great to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. If I could get that intro at every political function that I go to, Jeff, I would be good, man. I'll tell you what.
If you can just
Thank
be his hype man.
Yeah,
that's right.
You
That's
got
right.
this.
You could
He's
be
a
my
great hype
wingman
man.
anytime.
Hey, you could bring me. I could start it, and then I'd disappear for about 10 minutes, and then I'd come back and finish.
That's fair.
It would be like the UN meeting where the teleprompter goes down.
Yeah, or you get stuck on the escalator.
You're right. Yeah. Right.
Well, I'm hoping we can compete with the Bachelor show. My wife's probably watching in the other room.
See,
Quiet
you can't
on
even
the
compete
on the
with your
home front
wife.
here. Baby's asleep, dog's fed.
Yeah,
it's quiet in my house, so appreciate you guys.
if we are going to be completely honest, I have a confession to make, and JB was also, you were also part of this. Although people would understand you being part of this more than me, but that was a guilty pleasure for me a few years back. I used to actually watch.
Yeah, we would text a little bit about it.
Entertaining. I mean, it gets entertaining.
Yeah. And it was the human dynamics thing that had me all intrigued. It wasn't, it wasn't that I just needed a good cry. I promise.
Yeah. Although that was also therapeutic. Anyway, I digress.
Well, anyway, Stephen, it is so great to have you on the show. And what I would love to do first is maybe just talk about your early years in dentistry. I mean, obviously, we know what drove you to go into dentistry, seeing, what your family had built and what they had done for the community. But once you got out of dental school and you returned back to Ohio and you took the helm of this, nearly a century-old practice at the time, what was going through your mind as far as starting as a new dentist and building it into what you've built it into? And then at what point does that become, I've done a good job here. I'd really like to expand my reach and also help the patients and the constituents of Ohio. So maybe give us that story in a nutshell.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I came out May of 2020, smack dab in the middle of COVID. It was a very interesting time to get started in the healthcare world and dentistry in general. We were essential services, so we were really only closed for about 5 weeks. And going to NYU, I was supposed to graduate in Yankee Stadium. We were all very excited and ended up graduating on my parents' couch, watching my name go by on the computer. So that was a tough one. They did bring us back 2 years later to celebrate, but at that point, it was just more for ceremony than anything. I was ready to get started, having that family history, being at school for 4 years, coming back home. I really wanted to get out there and serve the patients that I knew, get started with practicing with my dad. And dad, he was ready to really hand over the practice, but not fully retire. So it was fun to be able to see the things that I learned at NYU, which was the biggest dental school in the country. I'm sure it still is. And for me to go straight into private practice, no GPR, it was a lot at the time. COVID was a tough thing to maneuver, not only from a patient perspective, but also from, a cost perspective, a hygiene perspective, everything. It was difficult. So I was really thrown to the wolves, and that's how my dad did it. I mean, he said that's how my dad did to him. It was 1986. It was the AIDS epidemic, and they started making people wear gloves. And my grandfather said, "I've had enough." He practiced his whole career with no gloves, which I thought was pretty gross. I'm like, I'm gloving up downstairs when I'm working on dentures in the basement. But it was a different time. And so for him, my dad was thrown into it just the same way that I was. And so we have that knack, it's in my blood, and I picked up the pieces and, had a really well-oiled machine that dad had practiced and made. And with the team that we've built, there's several members of our team that have been with us for 20 plus years. As you guys know, in dentistry, very hard to retain good talent and people. And these people are like family to our practice. So having that initial setup was huge. But coming out of NYU and seeing half of my class go to the corporate realm, in Aspen and in Heartland and all the practices across the country, it was eye-opening. And I thought, I have a unique opportunity, and the single doc practice is going to be a tough one to sustain, especially during COVID and onward, post-COVID, with cost pressures, inflation, hiring issues. So I saw that growth. And so I kind of knew at some point I wanted to expand. And the first year or two was really getting my skills down.
So I have a question for you, related but unrelated somewhat. So, we've seen a lot of changes since the year that you graduated.
Sure.
Do you feel that you were robbed of a portion of your education because March of 2020, 2 months before graduation, is when it kind of hit? And what kind of changes have you seen amongst the graduates after you from COVID?
Yeah, I mean, great question, Chad. I personally felt like I got lucky. The class below me and below them as well, it really hit their clinical experience, depending on where they were in the country and the rules of the school. For us, there was one or two dentures I didn't get to deliver, which I was pretty bummed about. But the clinical experience I had was excellent. It was pretty much ceremonial at that point. I do see, some of the dentists come out and, some are top notch and quality, and they're ready to roll and hit the ground running. But there are dentists I've spoken with who said, that experience during COVID hurt my clinical skill set because I just didn't have the opportunity to do as much as I thought I would have. Now, GPR residencies and jumping into different practices or specialties, you can make up for a lot of that. So I think, getting digital was a big thing for us. I learned the old fashioned way, right? And it took me a good 2 years doing that before, the Invisalign reps came through and they bugged me enough to say, it's time to get a scanner. And my dad thought this was outer space, to him. He said, this is unbelievable. But I've got him using it now when he comes in, and he's not working a whole lot. So I think there's so much change that, the young dentists coming out are pretty well prepared to take that change and then move forward with it.
Man, you're making me think about dental school education because you have a really interesting opportunity to see, and your dad can shed light on that as well, of the evolution of the preparedness of dental students when they come out. And the fact, so I lecture a ton on digital dentistry, and I felt like I was at the cusp of the analog digital era. I was a kid who got a computer in high school. We didn't have laptops in college. And in dental school, there was an alleged scanner somewhere in the dental school, but I never saw it. The fact that you still feel like you were taught like the old school analog techniques, which are absolutely fundamental to the understanding of what we do, but that our schools still are struggling to like get the momentum of digital and somehow bridge that gap. Any perspective, like your dad, did he look at you and go, man, I can't believe you don't know these particular things? Because I that's not a knock on you. I think in general, the education has really changed, even for me. And I'm probably, I don't know, 15 years your senior. And my mentors were like, man, I can't believe you don't know how to do that stuff. And I'm like, well, you didn't really teach us how to do that. Like, any perspective on that and the evolution of where we go from here?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'll say, NYU clinically was a great institution. I had some really excellent professors that taught me, both ways, and they were on the cutting edge of the technology. I mean, they had adopted the scanners, so we got all that, education as well. But my dad, he's a unique dentist. I mean, when I was telling my professors at dental school, that my dad, before I got out of dental school, he would drill on his own tooth. You know, if he needed to fix it, he'd hold up a mirror and he'd fix himself. I mean, he's got downstairs in our basement, grandfather has a bunch of antiquated denture stuff that my dad still uses to make the dentures. He gets the frameworks and he makes the rest. I mean, it's truly amazing. He's one of very few dentists that, you know, still enjoys that and still has the capability to do that. I seated a flipper 2 days ago and I looked at that patient and I said, I really can't take credit for this. I said, this is my father's work.
That's
And
awesome.
I don't know another dentist who could do it. So he's got that experience, but he sees the benefits of the digital. You know, I mean, our crowns are fitting better. There's less remakes. I mean, everything from the Invisalign that we're doing,
Yeah.
he's noticed, and he said, you know, that education, which for me was not only in school, but I was growing with it in my practice. I've been in practice for 5 years now. I've realized, you know, these are the things that work, and it's a lot of, you know, trial and error of, you know, not only from the dentistry, but side of the business side of things and running a business. You know, we've got 2 practices now in great locations, more than 20 employees in the local economy, and 4 docs in the practice, including Dad and I. So it's been a neat, you know, experience. I was always business minded, studied business at Ohio State. But you know, the real world is where, you know, you can really get that experience and say, you know, does this work? Does it help my bottom line? Does it help my patients? Does it help my
Mhm.
practice and my employees, or does it not? And if it doesn't, how do I work around that?
So, Stephen, I have a question,
Sure.
or really a request. If I would love to hear you take us from those initial conversations with your dad about, hey, Pop, I think we need to expand. I think we need to open a satellite because
Mm.
you know that's such a big step. So, take us through that transition where you started talking with your dad about this and then taking that leap of faith, because I know you have some strong opinions about you know, a lot of the private equity groups that are coming in, and these large groups. So I'd love to hear some of your perspective on that, but I'd also love to hear about your journey of, you know, coming in as a young dentist and saying, hey, Dad, here's what we need to do.
And I'm
Oh
going to
yeah,
add
no,
one caveat to that. Tell us
please.
where you rank out of the 4 dentists. So, like, were you like second, third, fourth, and how did that set with the other docs? So, sorry, I love Jeff's
No,
question, but I was like, I want to see where all this fits in.
No, that's
So,
great,
no,
Dad.
absolutely. Well, I will tell you guys, even before all that, you know, at NYU, they offered a program that was a joint MBA. And there was a really neat doctor that I had who had 4 or 5 practices on Long Island. And I said to him, I said, you know, Doc, do you think I should do the MBA? It was 1 year, it was direct admittance if you had the GPA, which I did. And he said, how much are they going to charge you for that? And I said, probably another $90,000. And he said, well, give me 10 grand and I'll teach you just as much and then some. And he was obviously kidding, but he said, you know, your father can teach you how to run a business. You know, you've been in dentistry, you studied business, go home and get practical. So the idea when I came out with Dad was really 6 months in, you know, he handed me the keys and sold me the practice at, you know, fair value and said, here you go. And at that point, it was, you know, guns ahead, all blazing. And I said, how can I take my family practice and scale that, right? Because we have such an awesome practice with 4 generations and patients who have seen all 4 docs. You know, many families who we see their kids and their grandkids. But that's a difficult thing to scale, especially in this day and age. So I started with a friend of Dad's. You know, he was probably mid 60s, just a year or 2 younger than my dad. Had a practice about 15 minutes away from my current practice. Very similar, smaller practice, but family oriented. A lot of patients who had seen him for 30 years. And I started working at that office, and for about a year, I worked for him just to make sure it was a good fit, and it was. And then hired, you know, bought the practice, hired him on, and he stayed on for a year with me, which you see a lot of private equity companies do. I mean, very rarely will private equity come in and buy your practice outright, and then you're gone. They want you to stick around. The difference is I was a 31-year-old dentist, you know, to the 65-year-olds, and you know, I could work out the vacation schedules. I was a little bit easier on them with, you know, percent of collections and all the rest because I respected them just as I'd respected Dad and the family tradition we had. But it brought in a whole group of patients who, you know, from a different part of town that said, oh, well, here's a guy with a lot of family history. And what I found was some of these patients had seen grandpa. Some of these patients had seen great grandpa. And they had seen, you know, the other doc later on in life. And so it was neat. As far as my father was concerned, he was kind of like, here you go. I mean, he watched the whole way. He gave me guidance. But he always told me dentistry is a great business. He goes, feel free to do as you please. If there's a career you want to pursue, follow it. But this is something that's provided for us and our family. It's connected us to the community in a really special way. And so he was encouraging. Now, I will tell you, after I bought the second practice, shortly after, I purchased a building maybe 5 minutes away from the second location. Now, this was a 12,000 square foot building, Jeff, and it was a big jump, okay? Because now I turned myself into a commercial real estate investor at the same time. And so I think I got a lot of looks of.
I know a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys know. And so, there's some really neat opportunities in the banking world with, Huntington, Bank of America, a lot of the bulge bracket banks that will lend specifically to healthcare lenders because they know, you guys run a good business. You're not going out of business. And so it allows us to diversify. So that's what I did. And I think that was the biggest jump until I decided I'd run for Congress.
So how many square feet did you say the building was? Did you say 12,000? Holy crap.
Yeah. So my dental practice is on the main floor, and that was a heck of a learning experience. It was really all me. I looked at partnering with another doc, and we really liked each other, enjoyed it, but just wouldn't work out because he had kind of done the same thing. So I had to decide: do I do this myself, or do I not? And I jumped in, all full speed ahead. And 9 months later, I built the place out. It's got 8 operatories, a cone beam, all brand new, and room for 8 more ops. So downstairs, I've rented it to a chiropractor, and we're working on getting upstairs rented out. But it's really allowed me to expand, my practice, but also, personal wealth and, generational wealth for my kids. And so I really encourage other docs, to look into the fact that there are avenues outside of going to work for, a private equity company backed DSO or an Aspen Dental. Now, you may have to start there. Everybody has to start somewhere. And I had the blessed opportunity to start where I did. But I do encourage people to think outside the box of ways that they could, ultimately own their own practice, because you guys have seen it in your own lives, and many docs have, my dad's age, the benefits that come with that.
Wow. You've got a good head on your shoulders, young man. It's pretty awesome.
I appreciate it. And I got a great support system. My mother works in the practice to this day. She was helping me until we've grown it big enough to where we definitely needed an office manager. And so we have a great office manager. Dad is consistently helping me, especially with the congressional run. A wonderful wife and family that, because this takes a lot of time. I really appreciate, Jennifer, your conversation about mental health. And I will tell you, between 2 offices, a newborn baby girl who's 9 months now, and a marriage and a new life and a family and a congressional run, it gets taxing. But I will tell you my secret. My gym just put in a cold plunge, and so I sit in that thing for about 3 minutes, and it is nearly impossible to think about anything at 45 degrees in cold water. So that's worked for me. That and a little less sleep.
Tell them about shrinkage, Chad.
No, gosh, no.
So let's switch gears a little bit. We talk about dentistry and talk about what motivates you in dentistry and where you're headed. Who in your family has been involved in politics, and where the hell did that come from?
Great question. The biggest question that I get from patients and people on the trail is, what's a 31-year-old dentist doing running for Congress, right? Which is a fun question. But I had an experience, as far as family members, my grandfather was involved locally. He was always involved in the community. He owned a golf course. He also was in local politics and, Kiwanis organizations and things of that nature, but nothing formal. When my first political itch came from the experience I had as a sophomore at Ohio State, I got the opportunity to work for Speaker of the House, John Boehner, on Capitol Hill. And that was eye-opening. I went out there for a summer and really saw the levers of power and how our government operates. But it gave me a passion for policy and public service. And so that experience, kind of instilled in me, although I was the only dentist on Capitol Hill at the time, dentist intern, or pre-dental, I should say. I realized that, dentistry was a great career. I didn't want to be an attorney. And I thought, what better to do than go home, take over our family business, practice, become a member of the community. And at some point, I didn't think now, but at some point I could get involved.
So what do you think? I'm sorry. Do you have a follow-up question, Chad?
No. You go ahead, Jeff. I got a lot of them. So keep going.
Yeah. So what is it that you hope to bring to your constituents? And not only that, I'm sure there are some things that you would like to see improved, maybe not just within dentistry, but within maybe healthcare as a whole. What are some of those overarching goals that you have,
Sure.
when, in all positive thinking, you are a part of our House of Representatives?
Great question. And I'll start with the second, specifically related to some of the dental policy and also general healthcare policy. I think being in Washington really gave me a clear-eyed experience of how policy can make a difference. I ended up becoming part of the ASDA's National Council as a legislative coordinator when I was in dental school. And so we would go to DC and we would lobby. And at the time, it was 2017, 2018. So the big issue then was the opioid issue. And Southwest Ohio was particularly hit very hard.
Mhm.
And so we pushed for acts like the Support Patients Act of 2018, which got through and reduced prescriptions for opiates and times and all the other benefits that came along with something like that, funding for mental health, a lot of things. So that policy showed me exactly how it could impact my local community. And then I came home and I saw this young guy, a few years older than me, who was very successful, and he started talking about some of those same things. And he wrote a book and he ran for Senate, and now he's our vice president, JD Vance. And so that was really neat to see someone with his trajectory get into politics, and obviously a very talented individual. But it kind of gave me that eye-opening, hey, this is our generation and we have to kind of take charge, because I look at Washington and I look at the dysfunction, I look at the $37 trillion of debt that I didn't rack up. And I think to myself, it's my daughter's generation, it's your kids and grandkids. They're going to have to pay the consequences for this. So as far as healthcare policy, Jennifer, you talked a little bit about, some of the antitrust laws that dental associations are looking into. You can think back to a time of Standard Oil in 1920s where, the big robber barons had gotten so big that it was really anti-competitive in a sense. And, I'm a conservative, a free market capitalist at heart. Nobody's coming to bail me out, right, Jeff, of my big building if I go belly up. But I do see at this current time, there are certain, insurance companies and other multi-conglomerates that really have the government in their back pocket and they have market share. And so I think it's good that we fight back in an organized situation with the ADA and the powers that they have against some of the insurance companies that are really pressing on young docs. I mean, here's a great example. My dad, the great dentist that he is, gets paid 20% more than I do for crown preps. Now I'm sure that's at least with certain specific insurance companies I won't name, because he's a premier provider and I'm post 2014. Now I'm sure that's because his work is 20% better than mine, right? But as he'd like to say, but it's really not. I look at the generation, mine coming out of dental school and thinking to themselves, there's a lot of really nice dental schools that are being built and added on to and funded by big insurance companies and the rest. I think what young dentists would care about is not coming out with $750,000 of debt, and maybe getting decent reimbursement rates from some of the larger carriers, because that would help us, get ahead. That would help us live the American dream. So to kind of pivot into your first question about the constituents of Ohio and Southwest Ohio's first district, I would say, my family and I have been blessed. We've lived that American dream. And to me, reviving the American dream in Southwest Ohio is most important. If you think back to a time, not long ago, the American dream rests on four pillars. First is really home ownership. You guys can probably remember buying your first house. I mean, it was expected that someone bought their own house, once they graduated college and got a job. Didn't have to be a big house, could be a small house, but you owned your house. And there's, there's truth to that, and the fact that that's how you start a family and that's how you get ahead in this world. And I think that escapes our generation. You could get by off a single family income in some situations back then. So I talked to a lot of the young folks, and that's a big issue. Second is economic opportunity and affordability. I was fortunate enough to host the Rising Republicans at my home. These are a bunch of college students from my area, Xavier University, Miami, and University of Cincinnati. 40 kids that were talking to me about the job market as they graduate. They're concerned. And I tie a lot of that, to the past administration's, lack of understanding of economic policy, the inflation that happened. The inflation really crushed us. We're halfway through the decade, and there are people that are working harder than ever just to keep up. And that's tough. And so economic policies matter. And I'd love to get into a little bit of that. But most people care about the kitchen table issues. Can I afford my groceries? How about gas prices? What about my property taxes? And the last two are really, related to the American dream would be public safety and making sure you have a safe community. We've seen it in Cincinnati. We've been on national news, and not for the right reasons. I mean, what's the government's role if it's not making sure you have a safe community? And personal to us, me, you, and you guys, education. We spend a lot of time in school to do what we do, and making sure kids, are afforded the right opportunity in an educational setting and are learning the right things to get ahead. Critical thinking abilities, logic, reason, economics, all these things are lost in our modern day school system. And these are things, that I pride myself as a lifelong learner and that have made me successful.
I have to say two things, Chad. Please.
Go for it. Go for it.
One, you bring up really important information about the antitrust stuff. And I didn't even mention, because we talked about it last week or 2 weeks ago, but Delta Dental is now purchasing practices in a certain Wisconsin
I
state.
saw that.
And so there's obviously some major issues that are starting to happen. And if we're concerned about small business and we're concerned about doctors making decisions with patients for the betterment of their overall health, their oral health, et cetera, those who pay them owning the practices are going to be that's going to be a real problem. And what I also love about what you said, and I want to highlight it because for folks that listen to the podcast, we talk a lot about term limits in the government and how we would love to get rid of some individuals because they've been there literally forever. I'm not sure. They probably knew your great grandfather. He might have been their dentist. But anyway, my point is, but it's going to take folks like the four of us, in particular, folks like you in their early career, to make that decision to take the banner up and pick it up for the next generation, serve your time, and then walk away and give it to your next generation. Because you are bringing that healthy new perspective from the trenches of what's actually really happening versus a 40-year-old retrospective perspective on what maybe happened when they were in the roaring 20s. So I really think that's super important to highlight, because it really is going to take a lot of young individuals to say, I know you're doing a lot. I mean, I'm sure people are listening. He's owning a business. He owns a building. He's got multiple practice locations, a newborn, a young marriage, the transition of a family business. And yet you're picking up the baton and saying, yeah, but I also have some loyalty to my country and to my fellow Ohio citizens. And it's time for me to step up. And I think that cannot be emphasized enough. Despite the outcome, if for no other reason that you said, yeah, but it's my job to serve, I think we absolutely have to highlight that for our listeners. And I look forward to seeing, as your platform develops over time and you get more involved in policy and those things, how dentistry plays such a critical role in that from the small business perspective, as much as from the healthcare perspective, and what you may be able to bring for that. One of my favorite individuals, which if you stick in politics long enough, there will be no way that you will not know him, is a dentist out of North Carolina, Dr. Oyster. And he always says, my favorite party is the D party, and that's dentistry. So he will support any individual who happens to be a dentist, regardless of their political affiliation, because he's so passionate about the future of the profession and what it means to communities, what you've highlighted, what it's meant to communities and what it means to the people who live there and the families that hang the shingle and keep hanging the shingle every 20 years as the next generation. So thank you for the platform, because I want to applaud you for what you're doing, because it cannot be overemphasized.
Well, I really appreciate you, Jennifer. And two thoughts on that. I had a patient in, and people are starting to hear about my run, and they're asking for yard signs, and I've gotten some good feedback. A gentleman who'd seen all four of us, all four generations, he came to me and he said, Steve, and I want to tell you something before you do this. And I said, what's that? And he said, you're going to take a pay cut. And I said, yes, I do know that. I said, but this is the service that you talked about. For me, there are many men and women out there that are in uniform, that serve our country, that are law enforcement. And those are some of the highest honors of service. But for me, this is an area where I think I can contribute. And I've been blessed with my family to be able to, put myself in this time and do that. And so the other thought that I had was, I'd read a book a long time ago called The Roosevelts, and it was about Teddy Roosevelt and FDR and their family and politics at the time. And as you mentioned, there was a period of time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where it was almost expected that if you were a community leader, a clergy, a business leader, a lawyer, or a doctor, that you go to Washington, you'd serve 2 terms, you get some stuff done, and then you come back, and that's it. And what you see today, on both sides of the aisle is people who have been there, and they've been there for a long, long time and haven't gotten a lot done. And it's time, to pass the baton, and they don't want to do it. And so I think that, I hope there's enough energy in the young generation, but also people that are older that see that, this is the time for others to lead, to step up into this position and do it before it's too late for our country. And so, I'm hoping to be able to represent the people of Southwest Ohio. But if for some reason it doesn't turn out, I've still got a day job, which is more than most of the people in Washington.
That's exactly right. Well, you can just follow Pelosi's stock trades. You'll be fine. I actually told my husband last night, I was like, I think I'm going to retire early, but it's fine because I now subscribe to Pelosi's stock trades. So as long as she's in office, I'm golden.
That's right.
So
I'll make so much money.
Here's the deal, dude. It's a big if, as far as I'm concerned, you don't make it. Okay.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to say this right now. If you don't make it, I guarantee you that your ass will be back because you've got a lot of fire, you've got a lot of vigor in you, and there's no quit in you. I can tell you that right now.
No doubt.
Now, with that being said, I have a big question. I was going to save it for the end, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there right now. Joking aside, I have a lot of friends in our community that are like, you ought to run for mayor. You ought to run for mayor. And the thing is that I know a lot of people in our community. I've been here for 25 years. I will never run for mayor. And there's one reason that I'll never run for mayor is that I just don't want any of that. I don't want any of that.
Yeah.
Have you lost patients over your run? Have you had issues with patients over your run? Have you converted patients over your run? I'm just curious as to how this run has affected your practice. I have a feeling, it's all good, but
it is. And, surprisingly, as most people would think, as divisive as the world is today in politics, you're either on one side or the other. We have 5,000 patients in the district. And so we see people of all political stripes, people of all ages and backgrounds. And I think at the end of the day, when you vote for someone, you're voting for the person. Right. And so many people have come to my practice and not all of them agree with me politically, but I think they know me. I had a young gal who I've done the Invisalign on, so I see her pretty regularly. And she lives in, the hip part of town, and she's unmarried and no kids and doesn't own a house. And she said, I saw your announcement. And I said, what'd you think? And she said, it's pretty cool. You're running for Congress. And I said, yeah. She said, I'll vote for you. And I said, great. And she says, I'm not a registered Republican, but, I know you and I know your dad and I know your family. And you seem like a pretty reasonable guy to me. And I said, I've got to represent everybody in this district if I win. And so, that's a privilege and an honor. And so I think, as far as converting patients, I've had quite a few people who have seen that I'm running and they've said, hey, I want him to be my dentist. And I said, absolutely, come on in. What I tell people is I'm here in the chair to serve your oral health. And that's what I'm doing right now, no matter how you feel about my politics or your politics. If you want to chat, whether you hate me or you love me, let's do it over coffee. Keep it outside the office is kind of my realm. And if people are interested about the run, happy to tell them and fill them in on it. But ultimately, we're a private practice and, my political views really don't affect, the practice. And that's kind of why I rebranded. We have 4 docs in the practice. It's not just me. And we're the Cincinnati Dental Group. And so that's given a lot of the other docs, a lane to just kind of make their niche in our office. And so, it's much bigger than politics in the practice, but it's been neat to see the support from the patients.
That's great. And that's the way that it should be. Unfortunately, you hit the nail on the head a little while ago when you said it's not, it's not that way in the general public. But we're in a unique profession to where we cater to people, we care for people, we're compassionate in general. And I love what you said. Whether it doesn't matter what side you're on, I'm here for your oral health. And I think that's very, very powerful. And I think your patients, knowing the history of your practice, are going to see that. There's not many dentists that run, but I think it's fantastic that you are, and good for you for having such a positive outlook.
Yeah, and on that note, I was speaking with a pretty prominent state legislator in the last few weeks, and he was a banker, and he told me I always wanted to be a community banker, Steve. That's always what I wanted to do. And he said through that, it allowed me to get into politics because of the people that I knew in my community and the people that I helped. And this was a guy who was on Fed Reserve boards regionally. I mean, he was a part of the Bankers Association nationally, and he told me it all started from serving my community. And I look at it and I think dentistry is really not that different. I know it sounds crazy to a lot of people that dentists, would run for office, but as many of you have mentioned, we're small business owners, we're community leaders. We see people every 6 months. I know their families and their kids. I know their health struggles, and I know weddings and birthdays and babies and all the rest. And so we really pride ourselves in our practice on knowing the patient, being part of the family, and extending our family's experience to them. And I think it comes through.
I actually love something that you just said, which is, that as a dentist, one thing that you absolutely get to enjoy is kind of having your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your community because of the diversity of the patients that you see.
Sure.
And I see that as just such a strength, to bring to DC, and as something that really you should be bragging about is, I've listened to these people every single day, and there's not many other professions that get to follow up on families and generations and get to watch what happens over time through different policy decisions. So I actually love that, and it just kind of opened my mind to that whole thing, and it makes me appreciate what you're doing even more. But with that, I do have a question, in that what would you like to see operate differently when you get to Washington? Because there's no doubt you're getting there at some point, whether it's this time,
Sure.
whether it's the next time, you're getting there, right? Like Chad said, what are, maybe one or two things that you would really like to see inherently change in how our country kind of is conducting its business, or within the legislative bodies?
Sure. Twofold on that. I think, we've seen really the rise of tensions, in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It topped it off for a lot of people. I mean, it was very, very divisive prior to that. And it's sad that we've gotten to a point in our country where politics, is worthy of murder to some people. At the same time, when I was in Washington, it was 10 years ago, 2015. I had a family friend when I got back from the experience, and he said, "Do you have more or less faith in our government now?" And I told him more. I said, I really did. I used to see Democrats and Republicans sit in Longworth House Office Building lunchroom and argue, and sometimes they'd argue like children, but it was policy debates. It was things that mattered. And at the end of the day, they might not have loved each other, but they walked away, better people. So I think everybody in this country, and I don't want to speak for them, but I really hope that people can start to see that we have to have respectful disagreements with people, and they need to be based around policy. I'm really a policy guy. Campaigning is one thing, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. We were just in the Heritage Festival, which is the downtown Mason, my hometown festival, and we took an old school Mercedes through, and we put the Erbeck for Congress on the sides, and we had quite a few friends out to pass out candy, which is ironic as a dentist passing out candy. So, that idea that we have to respectfully disagree is number one, and then number two. As far as the policy things go, I look at the deficit and I think to myself, post-COVID, we're Senator Ron Johnson had talked a lot about this. We're 7% deficit to GDP right now. Pre-COVID, we were 3% deficit to GDP spending wise, and that's unsustainable. I mean, this is like wartime 1945 spending in peacetime. And so, it might be easy for the senators that are in their late 80s to, legislate and continue to pass laws that spend more money, but for us, at some point, it's going to come due. And so, there's some economic policies that I think are important to clamp down on inflation. I look at the Fed and the policy post-COVID and the policy mistakes that they made, and it's Congress's job to hold those people's feet to the fire. And so, I'm excited to be able to potentially have the opportunity to do that and say, these things hurt the people of Southwest Ohio. And ultimately, it's those kitchen table issues that people care about, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Love it.
Well, I think there's so much that people can take away from this tonight, and we've unfortunately come to the end of our hour, but I want to ask you if you have any closing comments, and then you said something earlier that I just want to repeat. But do you have any closing comments or anything like that as we come to the end of the
last thing I would say is I got to leave you. Chad really needs to run for mayor. It sounds like
he does.
Because more people need to get involved. Young people need to get involved. People with experience and small business, leaders need to get involved. People with healthcare backgrounds need to get involved. So that there's a holistic representation in Washington. And that's kind of what I would leave people on. It's always easy to look beyond and listen to the politics on TV on both sides of the aisle and get disheartened about it. But remind yourself, you can step up and do something. It doesn't have to be Congress. It could be school board. It could be a state house race. It could be helping, people get elected. That's a huge part of that. I've got a great team behind me, and, it's not a one-man pony show. And so it's really a neat experience to get into politics, at this age, at this time, and have the support that I've had. So I would encourage other people, don't be afraid, get involved, especially if it's something that you care about.
Chad, you can run for the Grand Poobah of the Water Buffalo of Keller.
I could do that.
I heard it comes with a cool hat.
Yeah, it does. Anyways, I think this has just been a wonderfully spirited conversation. I am behind you 100%. I think
Appreciate it.
Anybody in dentistry that has the balls to run for Congress, you got my vote. I can't vote in Southwest Ohio, but I do know that you not only speak for Southwest Ohio, you speak for the entire United States of America. And one of the things that you said that I think was very powerful, and we'll close with this: policy, not politics.
Exactly.
And that is one of the least divisive statements that you could have made all night. And I loved your comments on policy, and I think that we all did. So, Dr. Erbeck, I wish you the absolute best of luck, and I have a feeling that we will be seeing a lot from your name, and I just think you're going to do great things. So thank you so much for standing up for our country, for your constituents, and for our profession. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. And you guys can always take a look at us, erbeckforcongress.com. We're on all the social medias, and follow our pages and kind of keep me in the loop as with the campaign progresses. I'll definitely have to be back on once I've got some more campaign trail stories for you guys.
You're not going to make us all do this, are you?
OHIO, I am.
Will they win the national championship this year? I mean,
easy. Yeah.
Well, hey, policy, not politics. Texas, not Ohio State. And
Texas got crushed, dude.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Over.
Do we need to remind you?
You're already out. You're already out.
Horns down. Yeah.
Yeah. You're already down.
All right, everybody. Have a great night.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you, Steven.
Will they beat Michigan? I mean, honestly, if they don't beat them this year,
they will.
That's a big one. They will.
They will.
I mean, I love the optimism, guys.
And that wraps up another podcast for Dentists in the Know. On behalf of Dr. Jennifer Bell, Dr. Chad Duplantis, and myself, remember that we've got a great profession, so let's make it a great day, Dinks.